The town of Harrow's End had always prided itself on its calm streets, orderly houses, and the comforting rhythm of small-town life. Children played until dusk, neighbors greeted each other by name, and nothing truly extraordinary ever happened. On the evening of August 14th, the town appeared exactly as it always did. Families gathered for dinner, televisions flickered in living rooms, and the soft hum of air conditioners filled the suburban silence. But just before 9, the ordinary dissolved into chaos. The lights went out. It was sudden, complete. Every streetlight, every lamp, every neon sign extinguished simultaneously, plunging the town into an uncanny darkness. At first, some residents thought it was a momentary glitch, a brief hiccup in the electrical grid. Then came the realization the blackout was total. Detective Clara Hayes, returning from a late shift at the Harrow's End Police Department, noticed immediately that something was wrong. Her own street, usually dotted with the warm glow of porch lights, was black. Shadows stretched and merged in the dark, creating shapes her mind refused to interpret. Clara's instincts prickled. Years of experience had taught her that sudden town-wide blackouts rarely coincided with calm, uneventful nights. There was always a reason. She walked carefully along the sidewalk, the faint crunch of gravel beneath her shoes the only sound. Houses on either side of her were silent, except for the occasional muttered voice of a confused neighbor or the anxious barking of a dog. Then, piercing through the quiet, came a scream. It was raw, sharp, and terrifying. Clara's heart raced as she ran toward the sound, arriving at the Morrison residence just as the candles on the porch flickered into life. By the time the electricity returned, a weak, trembling flicker, the horror was revealed. Jonathan Morrison lay on the floor of his study, slumped over his mahogany desk. A dark stain spread across his crisp white shirt, and his hand was frozen mid-reach toward the phone. The family was huddled nearby. Rachel, his younger sister, pale and trembling, his wife, Margaret, clutching their youngest child, and the eldest son, Daniel, eyes wide with disbelief. Clara moved quickly, assessing the scene. There was no sign of forced entry. No weapon was immediately visible. Jonathan's death had been sudden, precise, and terrifyingly intimate. He had not fallen by accident. This was murder. "Everyone stay where you are," Clara ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. She noticed the small details that often told more than words could. A chair knocked over near the doorway, footprints in the faint dust of the wooden floor, and the slight scent of something chemical, cleaner, maybe bleach, lingering in the air. The family's shock was palpable. Margaret stammered, I don't understand. He was just in the study. The lights went out and then, her voice broke into a whimper. Rachel's hands shook violently. I heard a thump and then nothing. We thought he'd fallen. Daniel, the eldest, avoided Clara's gaze entirely. It wasn't anyone from outside, he said quietly. It was inside. I don't know who. Clara's eyes narrowed. Inside, that was the first clue. The murderer had been someone trusted, someone with access. Blackouts didn't kill people. People killed people, and someone had taken advantage of the darkness to strike. Outside, the town was beginning to stir. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering to each other about the scream that had shattered the night. Some called the police, others simply watched from a distance, afraid to intervene. The black sky seemed to press down on the town, heavy and suffocating, as if even the heavens were holding their breath. Clara moved to secure the study. She documented every detail with meticulous care. The position of Jonathan's body, the scattered papers on the desk, the window slightly ajar, allowing a breeze to stir the curtains and hint at an escape route. There was nothing overtly violent about the scene, except for Jonathan himself, lifeless, and the silent testimony of the room. As she examined the room, her mind raced through possibilities. Could it have been someone from outside who somehow bypassed the locks? But then the footprints didn't make sense. They started inside the house near the hallway and led directly to the study. Could it have been someone inside the family? Someone hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of a camera shutter. Clara turned. It was Daniel, holding his phone awkwardly frozen. I was trying to record the blackout. Maybe it caught something, he stammered. Clara nodded but didn't take the phone. There would be time to check it later. Right now, securing the scene and ensuring the family was safe took priority. The tension in the Morrison household was nearly unbearable. Margaret was crying quietly, Rachel refused to sit still, pacing the room with erratic steps, and Daniel was slumped in a chair staring at the floor. Outside, shadows moved across the walls, swaying with the flicker of candlelight. In Harrow's End, a small town where everyone knew everyone, nothing had ever felt this threatening. By the time the last patrol car arrived, Clara had established a perimeter. Neighbors were questioned, the scene was cordoned off, and a sense of unease settled over the street. The darkness had lifted physically, but the psychological shadow lingered. Everyone who had witnessed the event, even peripherally, felt it. Clara knelt beside Jonathan's body one last time. There was something in the way he had reached for the phone that suggested he had known his attacker. But who and why? The answers were buried in the blackness of that fateful night, waiting to be uncovered. Outside, the streetlights flickered back to life. Harrow's End glimmered in its familiar calm, but beneath the superficial serenity, fear had taken root. One life had been taken, and nothing would ever be the same again. And somewhere in the quiet shadows beyond the Morrison home, a figure watched, calm, patient, waiting. The morning after the blackout, Harrow's End was unnervingly quiet. The sun rose over the town, but its light couldn't erase the lingering sense of dread. Detective Clara Hayes returned to the Morrison residence, determined to untangle the chaos of the previous night. Jonathan Morrison's death had shocked the town, but Clara knew this was more than a tragic accident. It was a carefully orchestrated murder, and the killer was still out there, watching. Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense. Margaret Morrison moved like a ghost through her home, wringing her hands, her eyes hollow. Rachel had stopped pacing but sat in the corner, shivering and staring at nothing. Daniel, the eldest, remained in his chair, muttering to himself as if replaying the night over and over. Clara started by reconstructing the blackout timeline. According to reports, the entire town had been without electricity for exactly 37 minutes. Surveillance cameras, alarm systems, and even the streetlights had gone offline simultaneously. Only pockets of candlelight had illuminated the darkness, and only briefly. Whoever had committed the murder had understood the town's infrastructure intimately. This was not a crime of opportunity, it was a crime of planning. Clara questioned the family again, looking for cracks in their stories. Margaret's voice trembled as she recounted the chaos, but Clara sensed more than fear. He was in the study. I thought he was safe. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. But Clara noticed the tiny inconsistencies, the slight hesitation before her words, the flicker of guilt or fear in her eyes. Was it stress or something else? Rachel's answers were even more peculiar. She admitted she had been upstairs checking on the children, yet she couldn't account for her movements for several minutes. Her gaze kept darting toward the study, almost as if expecting to see someone there. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed detached, too calm in his distress. He avoided questions, repeated phrases mechanically, and at times his eyes seemed to gloss over reality entirely. Outside the house, neighbors whispered about what they had or hadn't seen. Mrs. Caldwell, the woman across the street, claimed she had glimpsed a shadow moving near the Morrison window moments before the scream. I couldn't tell who it was. Tall, maybe a man, dressed in dark clothes, she said. But when pressed, her certainty wavered. Shadows could deceive anyone, Clara knew. Still, Clara followed every lead. Footprints were examined, the faint scent of bleach analyzed, and the small traces of dust disturbed near the study noted. None of it led to an immediate suspect, but patterns began to emerge. The killer had been inside the house during the blackout, perhaps someone familiar, someone trusted, and they had orchestrated the chaos so precisely that even the family could not have noticed until it was too late. Digging into Jonathan Morrison's life revealed another layer. He had been involved in a contentious business deal just weeks prior, a dispute that had left enemies in his wake. One former business partner had openly threatened him, another had been fired under suspicious circumstances. Yet Clara also discovered personal secrets. Rachel had secretly borrowed money from a local loan shark to cover gambling debts, a fact she had kept from everyone. Even the children, Daniel and little Emily, had hints of secrecy. Their private journals revealed small but telling entries about fears and observations from the blackout night. Clara began to suspect that Jonathan's death was not only a murder, but also a distraction or perhaps a message. The killer seemed to want something hidden, something buried in the shadows. Every interview, every clue, every whispered word led her closer to a web of deception that stretched beyond the Morrison household. Her investigation was interrupted by a phone call from the police lab. The forensic team had found traces of a rare chemical on Jonathan's clothing, a fast-acting substance that explained the suddenness of his death. "It's not something you'd find accidentally," the lab technician said. "Someone intended this to happen, and they knew exactly how to do it." Clara's mind raced. The killer was skilled, organized, and intimately familiar with the house, and if Jonathan's death had been planned with such precision, could another attack be imminent? While pondering these questions, Clara received another tip. An anonymous note slipped under her office door. "The truth is closer than you think. Watch the family." The message was unnerving. Whoever had sent it knew she was investigating, but why warn her and why focus on the family? Clara decided to revisit the scene that evening. The sun was setting and shadows stretched long across the Morrison home. She examined the study again, this time with a forensic flashlight that highlighted every imperfection in the room: smudged fingerprints on the desk, a faint indentation in the carpet, and a subtle, nearly imperceptible scratch along the windowsill. Someone had tampered with the room before the murder, or perhaps during. Neighbors were questioned again, and Clara noticed something chilling. Many claimed they had not seen or heard anything unusual, yet small inconsistencies kept appearing. Mrs. Caldwell, who initially described a tall shadow, now corrected herself. It may have been a figure bending low, almost crouching. Another neighbor mentioned hearing a muffled voice calling Jonathan's name, though no one else had confirmed it. Clara began to realize the killer had accounted for witnesses, manipulating shadows and sound to mask their actions. Back inside the house, the family dynamics were becoming more strained. Rachel and Daniel argued quietly but sharply in the corner, their words clipped and defensive. Margaret retreated to her room, crying softly. Clara watched closely, aware that fear often unravels the truth, but it can also create false narratives. One wrong question, one accusatory tone, and the fragile tension could explode, leaving her no closer to the truth. Her attention returned to the footprints. They were small, delicate, almost feminine, but deliberately misleading. Whoever had left them wanted to create doubt, to send investigators down a false path. Clara realized the killer had orchestrated every detail of the murder and the aftermath, anticipating every reaction. The blackout had been the perfect cover, but the aftermath, the confusion, the fear, the whispers, was also part of the plan. Late that night, Clara stood alone in the Morrison study. The room, once a place of normalcy, now felt charged with menace. She reviewed the notes, photographs, and fingerprints. Her instincts screamed that she was missing something, a key element the killer had left intentionally in plain sight. Then she noticed it. a small camera lens, almost invisible, tucked behind a stack of books. It hadn't been fully removed, only hidden. Clara's heart pounded. Someone had recorded the events leading up to Jonathan's death. Someone had wanted to watch or control the narrative. She didn't have the footage yet, but she had the proof of premeditation, and she had her next lead. The killer knew exactly what would happen, and now Clara had the first piece of the puzzle to uncover who had exploited the darkness and why. The night closed over Harrow's End, heavier than ever. Families slept fitfully, glancing at shadows, listening for sounds that weren't there. Clara remained vigilant, aware that the true danger had not passed. The blackout had ended, but the secrets it had concealed were only beginning to emerge. And somewhere, just out of sight, the killer was smiling. They had achieved their goal once, and they were patient enough to wait for the next opportunity. The day after Clara discovered the hidden camera, Harrow's End felt more like a town under siege than a quiet suburban community. The murder of Jonathan Morrison had already shattered the sense of safety, but now, with proof that someone had deliberately recorded the events leading to his death, fear gripped every resident. People whispered behind drawn curtains, avoided the streets at night, and locked doors they had never considered closing. Clara returned to the Morrison house at first light. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. Rachel was sprawled on the living room couch, her eyes red and bloodshot from crying. Daniel paced silently, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The atmosphere was suffocating, a tension so thick it seemed to press against Clara's chest. She knew the killer had calculated every move, but she had to stay ahead. One misstep, one overlooked clue, and they could strike again. Clara began by reviewing the camera footage. It was grainy, partially obscured by shadows, but every second revealed something important. Jonathan had been alone in the study for only minutes before the attack, but there was movement outside the room, subtle, almost imperceptible. A figure approached the desk, leaned over Jonathan, and left just as quickly. The lens hadn't captured the face clearly, but the shadow's posture, the timing, the careful movements all screamed professional. This was no amateur. Clara then turned her attention to Jonathan's associates. The investigation revealed a long list of possible suspects, each with motive and opportunity. There was Henry Caldwell, a former business partner who had publicly argued with Jonathan over embezzlement. Then there was Felix Moran, a fired employee who had vanished for days following the blackout, only to return with vague explanations. And lurking beneath all of it were family secrets. Rachel's gambling debts, Margaret's quiet resentment over her husband's long hours, Daniel's mysterious late-night excursions. Interviews with neighbors added more complications. Mrs. Caldwell insisted she had seen a car parked near the Morrison residence that evening, a car she couldn't identify in the darkness. Mr. Leary, the local grocer, recalled seeing a shadow moving across the street just before the lights went out, and a delivery driver mentioned noticing a figure lurking in the alley behind the house, only visible in the fleeting glow of a streetlight. Each of these reports painted a different picture, but none provided clarity. The killer had carefully manipulated every witness, leaving only fragments of truth. Meanwhile, Clara began piecing together the forensic evidence. The wound on Jonathan's neck was clean and precise, suggesting that the killer had experience with weapons or surgical tools. The footprints in the study, once assumed to be small and feminine, now appeared deliberately misleading. Clara suspected someone had tried to misdirect the investigation, planting evidence to confuse the police. Every clue was a trap or a message. Late in the afternoon, Clara received an anonymous tip via email. "Look closer at those closest to him. The shadows tell the truth." The message chilled her. Someone was watching her investigation as closely as she was watching the murder scene. The killer wasn't done. They wanted to control not just the crime, but the investigation itself. That evening, Clara returned to the Morrison home to speak privately with Daniel. She found him in the study, staring at the desk where her father had died. "You were here the night he died," Clara said softly. "I need you to tell me everything you remember." Daniel shook his head. I can't. I wasn't in the study, but I saw someone. I didn't get a good look. It was dark, too dark. I didn't know what to do." "Did you hear anything unusual? Any sounds, movements?" Clara pressed. He hesitated, then whispered, "A voice, calling my father's name. Calm, almost polite, like they were guiding him somewhere. I swear it wasn't a struggle, not at first. Then the scream, that scream." Clara's stomach tightened. The killer had orchestrated the night with terrifying precision, controlling not only the murder itself, but also the reactions of those inside the house. They had anticipated every move, every reaction, every hesitation. Determined to catch the perpetrator, Clara expanded the investigation to include technical analysis of the electrical system. The blackout, she realized, wasn't random. Someone had intentionally caused it. A detailed inspection revealed that the main transformer had been tampered with, not enough to cause permanent damage, but enough to create a timed outage. Only someone with access to the system and technical knowledge could have pulled it off. The implications were clear. The killer wasn't just hiding in shadows. They had the skills, knowledge, and patience to plan the perfect crime. As night fell again over Harrow's End, Clara reviewed every lead once more. The forensic lab had identified the chemical traces on Jonathan's clothing as a rare sedative, fast-acting and difficult to obtain. The footprints, the shadows, the camera, all pointed to a methodical mind, and the tip about those closest to Jonathan raised an uncomfortable possibility. The killer might be someone inside the Morrison household, or someone trusted by the family. Clara's phone buzzed with another tip, this time a photograph sent anonymously. It showed a figure crouched near the back door of the Morrison house during the blackout, captured by a neighbor's security camera. The face was obscured, but the posture was deliberate, almost clinical. Someone had waited for the perfect moment to strike. Determined to not let the killer strike again, Clara set up surveillance around the house. Officers were stationed at every entrance, and hidden cameras were positioned to monitor key areas. Clara herself patrolled the perimeter, flashlight in hand, eyes scanning every shadow. Hours passed, the town silent except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional bark of a dog. Then, just past midnight, movement. Clara's heart leapt as she saw a shadow slip along the side of the house, avoiding the cameras with practiced ease. Someone was testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses. She radioed the team to hold their positions, careful not to alert the intruder. The shadow paused near the back door, crouched low, and disappeared into the night. Clara knew it was the same figure from the photograph. Whoever it was, they were bold, confident, and dangerous. The blackout had been their playground, and now they were returning to the scene, daring her to catch them. Clara realized something horrifying. This wasn't just about Jonathan Morrison. The killer had a plan, and Jonathan's death was only the beginning. They were methodical, intelligent, and patient. They had studied the family, studied the town, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Clara stood in the cold night air, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She made a silent promise. Whoever did this, she would find them. They had used shadows and silence as weapons, but she would uncover every secret, follow every lead, and catch them before they could harm anyone else. The town slept uneasily, unaware of the predator still at large, and somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the killer watched, waiting for the right moment to make their next move. The town of Harrow's End was quiet once more, but the air was thick with fear. After days of investigation, Detective Clara Hayes had finally pieced together enough of the puzzle to take a decisive step. The killer had orchestrated every element of Jonathan Morrison's death: the blackout, the precise method of the murder, the misleading footprints, and the hidden camera that watched every movement. Whoever had done this was meticulous, patient, and disturbingly confident. Clara knew one thing for certain: the murderer was familiar with the Morrison household and possibly with the town itself. This wasn't a random attack, it was personal. The evidence pointed in one direction, and it all led to someone everyone had overlooked: the handyman, Edward Sloan. Quiet, polite, seemingly harmless, Sloan had worked for the Morrison family for years. No one suspected him, but Clara's gut and the mounting evidence told her he was the predator hiding in plain sight. That evening, Clara prepared for the confrontation. She coordinated with the police department, arranging a controlled blackout drill in the Morrison home to draw out the killer. Officers were stationed strategically around the perimeter, cameras set to capture every shadow, every movement. Clara herself patrolled the hallways, her flashlight cutting swaths through the darkness. She felt the tension coiling in her stomach, the sense that something monumental was about to happen. Inside the Morrison house, Margaret, Rachel, and Daniel sat in the living room, nervously awaiting instructions. Clara spoke calmly to them, careful not to incite panic. "We're doing this to ensure your safety," she said. "The killer is patient, but tonight we're taking control." The lights were cut manually, plunging the house into darkness. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, a faint creak echoed from the hallway, a subtle, deliberate sound. Clara signaled the officers to hold their positions and move toward the noise, flashlight scanning every corner. A shadow moved near the study. Clara froze, recognizing the posture immediately: low, deliberate, calculating. Sloan. He had returned as she suspected he would. He had watched her investigation, anticipated her moves, and was testing the house, confident in his control over the darkness. "Edward Sloan!" Clara called out, her voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. "It's over. Step into the light." The figure paused, then bolted toward the back of the house. Officers shouted, pursuing him, but Sloan had planned this escape. He darted through narrow hallways, sliding behind furniture, using every shadow to his advantage. Clara followed, flashlight beam bouncing off walls, catching fleeting glimpses of his movement. She realized the depth of his cunning. The blackout had been his greatest weapon, and he still tried to use it. Finally, Clara cornered him in the basement. The room was dimly lit by emergency lights, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. Sloane's face was calm, almost eerily composed, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding him. "You shouldn't have come after me," he said quietly, almost a whisper, but every word dripping with menace. "I planned everything. The blackout, Jonathan, it was perfect. And now you think you can stop me?" Clara kept her eyes locked on his, steady despite the adrenaline racing through her body. "It's over, Sloan. You underestimated me. We know about the camera, the chemical traces, the blackout. You've left too many trails." Sloan laughed softly, a sound that made Clara's skin crawl. "You think you've solved it, detective. You've seen pieces, fragments, but you don't understand the whole picture. Jonathan wasn't just a target. He was a symbol." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, keeping her tone calm. He stepped closer, the light catching the knife tucked in his belt. "He thought he could control everything. The family, the business, even me. I wanted him to see what happens when someone thinks they're untouchable." Clara signaled to the officers, ready for a tactical move. Sloan lunged, but Clara anticipated it. She sidestepped, grabbing his wrist and twisting, forcing him to drop the knife. 2 officers moved in immediately, cuffing him securely. The tension broke in a rush of adrenaline and relief. Sloane's calm demeanor shattered as the reality of capture set in. He spat curses and tried to pull free, but the officers held firm. "You don't understand. This isn't over. There's more. I could've—" Clara interrupted, her voice cold and unwavering. "Your time is over. You won't hurt anyone else." With Sloane in custody, the team began piecing together the full story. The blackout had been deliberately caused by tampering with the electrical panel weeks in advance. Sloane had obtained the rare sedative used on Jonathan, calculated its dosage to incapacitate him without struggle, and created the perfect environment for murder under cover of darkness. The footprints, the camera, and the manipulated shadows had all been elements of his plan, designed to mislead the investigation and control the narrative. The Morrison family slowly began to comprehend the scope of what had happened. Margaret held Rachel and Daniel close, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe it. All this time he was here, in our home." Clara placed a reassuring hand on Margaret's shoulder. "He was meticulous, yes, but now he's in custody. You're safe. That's what matters." Even as the tension in the house eased, Clara couldn't shake the lingering sense of unease. Sloane's calm, calculating demeanor had hinted at a deeper darkness. He had committed murder with precision, and even in capture, there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. It was a chilling reminder that evil often hides behind ordinary faces, waiting patiently for the right moment. The next morning, the town of Harrow's End began to return to its routine. Streets that felt tense and ominous once again echoed with the sounds of daily life. Children played, neighbors greeted each other, and the sun rose over a town that, on the surface, seemed unchanged. But the memory of the blackout lingered. Families locked doors more carefully, neighbors watched shadows with suspicion, and the Morrison household carried the scars of the night forever. Clara Hayes, having solved the case, knew she had done her job, but the psychological aftershocks remained. Darkness, she realized, could hide more than just shadows. It could hide obsession, resentment, and the potential for violence in the most ordinary places. Sloane was arraigned for the murder of Jonathan Morrison, and his trial revealed the depth of his premeditation. The town was stunned by the meticulous planning, the precise execution, and the casual cruelty with which he had committed the crime. Clara's investigation became a blueprint for handling cases where cunning and patience replaced brute force, and the story of that fateful night became a cautionary tale for the town. Yet even as justice was served, a lingering thought remained in Clara's mind. The open window in the Morrison study, the shadows outside the house, the subtle signs she had observed throughout the investigation. Had Sloane been acting alone, or had there been others waiting in the darkness, watching the town, waiting for the next opportunity? Harrow's End would never forget the night the lights went out. One life had been taken, many more had been shaken to their core, and the memory of darkness lingered in every corner. And somewhere, perhaps, a shadow still waited, knowing that not all secrets could ever be fully illuminated.